As much as Richard Posner is thought of as the godfather of law and economics, Bob Scott is the godfather of the law and economics of contracts and commercial law. He set the discipline on its path a half century ago and led it over the past 5 decades by continually unearthing and developing new inquiry and analyses. His early work with Charlie Getz in the 1970s and the 1980s established and demonstrated the core fundamental premise. If contracts enforcement's principal purpose is to give effect to the parties' intentions, we should have a deep understanding of what motivates them to contract, why they would write the terms they do, and what they would like the courts to do in interpreting and enforcing their agreements. Recognizing the central purpose of joint value maximization in most contracts, Bob shed new light on many commonly used terms whose interpretation had been either constrained or confused, such as liquidated damages or best efforts clauses. And many courts followed his guidance since then. One of my favorite pieces, although not pure contract theory, is Bob's work on relational financing, where he used a combination of theory and empiricism to explain the use of blanket security interests in bank lending, which had become a phenomenon of concern to some courts and lawmakers. Bob's work was also seminal in developing the economic principles of relational contracts, previously recognized in the work of his fellow Scots, Stuart Macaulay and Ian McNeill. Over time, Bob engaged with and brought insights from behavioral economics to understand more deeply the interactions between legal and non-legal sanctions that together provide incentives for performance. What was it like to co-author with Bob? It was a uniquely enriching experience that taught me so much more than one can get from reading his articles. I learned the process of generating and developing scholarly ideas. His intellectual integrity, curiosity, and generosity are unique. They explain why Bob Scott has continued to thrive in the life of research and scholarship. Bob derives great energy and joy in learning from others. He has an open mind, and he loves the give and take of academic discourse. And this allowed his work to evolve and continue to be at the center of scholarly debates for over a half century. I'll give you an example. In the late 1990s and early 2000s, Bob wrote, often with Alan Schwartz, about the importance of certainty in commercial transactions, the value of clear default rules, and formal interpretation. In the face of evidence that commercial parties themselves often invoke vague provisions in their explicit contracts, Bob seized the opportunity to explore a more nuanced analysis, asking for the conditions under which contracting parties would prefer either precise or vague provisions. He remained a proponent of formalism, but with a much more textured theory and understanding of contractual interpretation. On a personal note, it's no exaggeration to say that I owe my opportunities and growth as an academic to Bob. He was my bankruptcy professor 40 years ago, and since then, my colleague and my dean at Virginia, my co-teacher in advanced contract seminars, co-author of numerous articles, my mentor, and most significantly, a stalwart and generous friend. As a student and rookie academic, I dreamed about being the next Bob Scott. Once I joined him as a colleague, he steered me to my own path with a generosity and wisdom for which I am profoundly grateful. More than any recognition of his influence, I know that Bob wants us to pay forward, to mentor the next generation of contract scholars with the same patience, generosity, and open-mindedness that he has shown us. Most of all, Bob leads with the utmost civility and decency. We are living in a very dynamic environment, and patterns of contracting, lawyering, and legal education are changing rapidly. In my life as a professor and now as dean, I'm still often guided by, what would Bob say? What would he ask? What would he do?